When Earth finally received the message from the Galactic Concord, people all over the planet celebrated like it was the greatest moment in human history. The message came not as a warning or a threat, but as an invitation to rare welcome into a galactic alliance that had lasted thousands of years. The Concord was made up of hundreds of advanced alien species, each with technology far beyond what Earth had. Joining them was considered an honor, a sign that humanity had become mature, enough to be trusted with knowledge, power, and peace. As part of their tradition, the Concord gave Earth a gift, a spaceship, the Moravius Class 9 Scout. When the news broke, people cheered, thinking they had been given something powerful and valuable. But the truth was different. The Moravius was old, very old. In fact, the ship had been sitting in dry dock for almost a century. Its engines were slow, its shields were weak, and its weapons were the kind you'd find in a museum. Many alien delegates considered it a ceremonial gesture, not a real contribution. One alien captain was even overheard saying, "Give the humans the toy. Let them feel proud." To the Concord, humanity was still new and inexperienced, like a child playing dress-up in a soldier's uniform. They didn't mean to be cruel, but they also didn't expect much from Earth. The ship was more of a symbol than a tool. But then came Captain Eleanor Rourke. She was not the kind of person who cared much about symbols. A former test pilot and later a diplomat, Elena had spent her life flying dangerous prototypes and speaking across negotiation tables. That could turn hostile in an instant. She had nerves of steel, a quick mind, and a reputation for turning impossible situations into opportunities. When she first stepped aboard the Moravius, she didn't smile or frown. She simply walked through the rusting corridors, past flickering lights and ancient control panels, and took notes. The ship smelled like metal dust and coolant. The AI core was barely functional. The navigation system lagged by several seconds, and the internal gravity system made a soft humming sound like it was trying too hard. Her crew, most of them young and freshly graduated from Earth's new space academies, followed her in silence. Some shook their heads. A few chuckled nervously. "Is this a joke?" One engineer whispered to another. Elena said nothing. She just kept walking, taking it all in. What the others saw as a dead end, she saw as a challenge. In a private meeting later that evening, Elena spoke to her senior officers. "They gave us this ship because they don't expect us to do anything important with it," she said, calmly, her voice steady. "But they forgot one thing. Humans don't play by the same rules." Her words carried weight. Over the next few weeks, she got to know her crew better. Many of them had unusual skills: hackers who used to break into satellites for fun, engineers who could build working drones out of scrap, coders who treated artificial intelligence like a puzzle to be solved. Elena started making quiet changes. She didn't request upgrades from the Concord. She knew they wouldn't help. Instead, she contacted independent spaceports, black market traders, and even retired Earth scientists who had been working on experimental tech. Slowly, piece by piece, the Moravius began to change. One day, while inspecting the ship's fusion core, Elena found a young technician, Malik, sketching ideas on a tablet. His design was a modification that could boost the ship's energy output by 20% using a rotating coil loop and recycled waste heat. "Why hasn't this been done before?" Elena asked. Malik shrugged. "Most Concord engineers don't like messy solutions. They want perfect systems. But we don't have perfect. We have what we have." Elena smiled. "Good. Keep going." That moment was the start of something. The Moravius was no longer a dead ship. It was a shell waiting to be filled. Elena began running the crew through combat drills, not standard Concord drills, but human ones. Unpredictable, dirty, creative. They practiced how to disable ships by hacking their communications, how to use debris fields as cover, and how to fake system failures to bait enemies into overconfidence. The crew started bonding, not because they had the best ship, but because they had the most to prove. Rumors began to spread through the outer Concord channels. The humans are modifying their scout. They're running strange training programs. The ship's power readings don't match its original specs. Still, most aliens didn't pay much attention. Let them play, they said. They'll burn themselves out trying. But deep down, a few began to worry. Humans, after all, had a history of making more with less. They had survived on a planet full of natural disasters, limited resources, and internal wars. And they had still reached the stars. Now, they were being handed scrap sand instead of complaining. They were sharpening them into weapons. Elena knew they were being watched. She made sure of it. Every time the Moravius launched a test flight, she left just enough signal trails for Concord sensors to pick up. Every successful system reboot, every time the shields held during a simulated impact, every time a drone was defeated in a mock dogfight, it was all recorded. She wanted them to see, not to brag, but to warn Dot, because one day, soon, they would need the Moravius for real. And by then, it wouldn't be the weakest ship in the fleet. It would be the most dangerous one, because it was human-made, human-flown, and human-forged through necessity. Elena didn't say any of this out loud. She just kept working, kept pushing, kept preparing. Because to her, this wasn't a joke. This was just the beginning. Back at Luna shipyards, with the Earth glowing like a quiet blue flame far below, Captain Eleanor Rourke stood at the observation window of Bay 47, watching her ship, the old, battered Moravius, being stripped down to its bare bones. Around her, the clang of tools, the sparks of cutting torches, and the low hum of industrial machines filled the air as dozens of workers moved like ants on a broken machine. This was not a simple repair. This was a complete rebirth. Elena had chosen her crew with care, not just for their loyalty, but for their brilliance in unconventional fields. She brought together engineers who had modified scrapyard transports into racing crafts, AI programmers who had written decision trees for combat drones during Earth's last border conflicts, and even a few former smugglers who knew how to hide illegal cargo in plain sight. What they all had in common was one thing: they didn't follow the book, they rewrote it. The Moravius, once considered a floating museum piece by the Galactic Concord, was now a blank canvas, and these people were about to paint a masterpiece. With bolts and fire, the first step was tearing out the old systems. The original fusion coils, meant to power light scout missions, were not only weak but dangerous under pressure. They were carefully removed and replaced with overclocked plasma cores, built in Earth's underground labs, running hotter and faster than anything standard. The Concorde used nanoglass and self-healing polymers for ship armor, sleek, expensive, and fragile under chaotic fire. Elena's team went another way. They reinforced the hull with a carbon steel lattice taken from asteroid mining rigs. It wasn't pretty, but it could take a beating and still fly. Pipes were rerouted, vents repositioned, even the engines were adjusted to allow for short bursts of erratic maneuvering, something no Concorde ship dared to attempt, due to strain on their elegant systems. Elena didn't want elegance. She wanted survival. She wanted adaptability. She wanted a ship that didn't just fly, it fought like it was alive. The biggest change, however, came inside the core. The ship's mind, the original AI, named M9, had been designed for reconnaissance, not combat. It followed protocols, calculated risks in percentages, and lacked any creativity. That wouldn't do. So the programming team, led by a quiet genius named HFY, began rebuilding the AI from the ground up. They stripped it of its limitations, gave it the ability to predict enemy patterns using old Earth war data, and taught it how to make decisions in chaos, not despite it. 1009 became something new, still logical, but unpredictable. It began running simulations at night, modifying its own strategies, even creating decoy scenarios to test the crew's reactions. It was learning not just how to fight, but how humans fought using surprise, deception, and raw instinct. When Elena heard that, she didn't stop it. She encouraged it. She believed that no ship could ever be truly dangerous if it only followed rules. And the Moravius was going to be dangerous. Very soon, while the ship's body changed in the dry dock, the crew trained inside simulation chambers that mimicked battle situations, far beyond the Concorde's usual standards. Instead of practicing neat formations and clean responses, they, trained in zero-light conditions, learned to fight while systems were failing, and practiced ship-wide resets in under 30 seconds. They memorized blind spots, manual overrides, and even how to pilot the ship without navigation systems. This was not standard training, it was survival preparation. Every mistake was discussed. Every system failure became a lesson. No one laughed anymore when they mentioned the Moravius. The crew knew what they were building. It wasn't just a warship. It was a challenge to the galaxy's quiet assumptions. News started to spread, quietly at first, through Concorde communication relays. A few observers stationed at Luna noticed the strange modifications. Earth's ship undergoing irregular retrofits, one report said. Another questioned why the humans were operating without official Concorde engineers. Back at Luna, Elena pretended not to notice the sudden increase in surveillance drones hovering near the dock. She kept her crew working, knowing every move was being watched. She didn't hide what they were doing. She wanted them to see, not to show off, but to prove something deeper. That humans weren't going to be quiet background players in the Concorde. They were going to be something different, something new. The whispers continued to grow. What are the humans building? Why does their scout ship outperform frontline ships? What is their purpose? The Concorde Council held private meetings, debating whether Earth was moving too fast, pushing boundaries they didn't understand. But they still didn't interfere. Not yet. Perhaps they still believed it was a fluke. Or maybe they were too proud to admit that the weakest ship in their fleet was slowly becoming one of the most dangerous vessels in known space, not because of its parts, but because of its people. Elena knew what was coming. They wouldn't be ignored for long. One day, someone or something would test them in real space, not simulations. That was fine. She wasn't building a symbol. She was building a weapon. And when the moment came, the Moravius now, the ISS Forge, as her crew had started calling, it would be ready to prove what humanity was truly capable of. The ship once known as the Moravius, now proudly renamed the ISS Forge, floated silently above the edge of the Volcran expanse, its hull marked by layers of reinforced steel and human ingenuity. The mission was supposed to be routine, just a quiet patrol near a region that the Galactic Concorde had long abandoned due to pirate activity and unstable conditions. The Forge's presence was meant to be symbolic, a kind of ceremonial gesture, to show that humanity could fly among the stars, nothing more. At least, that's what the Concorde intended when they gave the orders. But Captain Eleanor Rourke had a different view. She didn't believe in symbolism without purpose. She believed in readiness. She believed in testing her ship and her crew, where it mattered, out where no one would help, no backup would arrive, and no one would hold her hand. The Volcran expanse was full of stories, pirates, ghost signals, drifting wrecks, but no Concorde ship had gone near it in years. They called it unstable space. not worth the risk. But for Elena and her crew, it was the perfect place to see if their hard work would hold against real fire. What they didn't know was that they were already being watched as the forge moved deeper into the expanse. Its sensors picked up faint energy spikes too weak to be natural, too irregular to be random. At first, the crew thought it was interference, a side effect of the expanse's fractured gravity fields. Then came the silence. All channels went dark, and the forge's comms flickered with static. Elena knew at once they weren't alone. She ordered red alert just seconds before the first attack struck. A bolt of plasma fire slammed into their forward shields, shaking the entire ship. 3 ships emerged from the dark, sleek and deadly, marked with the red claw insignia of the Volcran Raiders. These weren't old scavengers. They were running modern pirate tech, fast engines, upgraded weapons, and aggressive tactics. Under normal Concord protocol, the forge would have turned back or sent for help. But Elena didn't follow normal. She gave a single order: engage. The crew didn't hesitate. This was what they had trained for, not clean simulations or carefully planned battles, but chaos. The forge didn't fight like other ships. It fought like it had a soul, wild, unpredictable, and terrifying. Elena ordered the ship into a reverse loop through a nearby asteroid cluster, using gravity's slingshot momentum to circle behind the nearest pirate ship. The raiders didn't expect that. They thought the human ship would try to escape. Instead, it fired the forge's weapons, retrofitted with overpowered rail cannons and directional plasma bursts, tore through the first raider's rear thrusters. The ship spun out of control and vanished behind a drifting ice moon. The second pirate vessel launched drones, but the forge's eye rebuilt to think more like a human than a machine, jammed their targeting systems and sent a false signal, tricking the raiders into firing at their own drones. The crew moved with flawless speed, manually rerouting power, patching systems mid-fight, and launching counterattacks through exhaust ports to avoid detection. In the middle of it all, Elena stood calm, her voice clear, giving commands like a conductor leading a storm. The third pirate ship moved in close, trying to board, but was met with a burst of shrapnel mines launched from hidden compartments. On the forge's underbelly, the explosion didn't destroy the ship, but it disabled its comms and sensors, leaving it blind in the battlefield. Within 17 minutes, the battle was over. 3 pirate ships outclassing the forge on paper were either disabled or fleeing. The forge, while damaged, was still standing, its crew alive and its weapons warm. For a brief moment, there was silence on the bridge. Then, slowly, one of the engineers laughed. Not out of joy, but disbelief. They had survived. No more than that. They had one unknown to them. A Concord observation probe, hidden near the expanse's border, had recorded the entire battle. It was standard protocol to monitor new member missions, and the forge had been under watch since its rebuild began. The footage was sent back to Concord High Command, where it caused a ripple of confusion and quiet alarm. This was not how Concord ships fought. The moves were reckless, the tactics unorthodox, and the risks unacceptable by Concord standards. Yet it had worked. And more than that, it had worked brilliantly. Analysts replayed the footage over and over, watching Elena's wild maneuvers, the crew's response under fire, and the AI's tactical deception. These weren't just lucky humans. This was something else, something dangerous. Some council members said it was a fluke. Others called for an inquiry. But a few, the quietest and oldest among them, remembered humanity's first contact and had warned that Earth would not be just another voice in the crowd. That warning now seemed more like prophecy. The Volcran pirates, known for hunting lost, Vessels and feeding on strays had met a ship built from scraps, powered by desperation, and driven by a captain who refused to be predictable. Back on the forge, repairs had already begun. Systems were damaged, a few injuries had occurred, and one engine needed to be shut down temporarily. But morale was high, higher than ever. The crew had faced their first real battle, and not only had they survived, they had made the galaxy. Take notice, Elena stood in the engine room, speaking with the engineers, her hands greasy from helping with the coolant lines. "This is just the start," she said quietly. "We've lit a spark. Let's see how far the fire spreads." And spread it would, because whispers had already begun traveling through back channels, across comms, and into the dark corners of the galaxy. A new kind of ship had entered the void, and it didn't play by the rules. The story of the ISS Forge had already begun spreading through the hidden corners of space, carried by whispers, reports, and reluctant respect from observers who once saw humanity as a curiosity. What began as a retrofitted joke of a ship had now become something serious, a symbol of raw adaptability and fearless action. Across Concord fleets, officers and tacticians were quietly reviewing footage of the Forge's encounter in the Volcran expanse. They didn't understand how such an old ship had defeated modern pirate vessels. And the answers weren't in the tech specs, it was in the thinking. Humans didn't follow traditional logic in battle. They made strange choices, took unexpected risks, and seemed to thrive in unpredictable situations. For centuries, the Concorde had enjoyed peace, order, and routine. Their war simulations were built around structure, control, and expected behavior. But that balance shattered when signals arrived from the edge of the outer rift, a place so distant and uncharted that most species treated it like a myth. The signals weren't calls for help, they were distress echoes, burst transmissions of dying ships, and sensor ghosts that revealed shapes too large and fast to classify. The Concorde's early scouts vanished without reply. Automated defense satellites were wiped out before they could send full reports. Something was coming, something fast, organized, and completely outside Concorde expectations. Panic spread slowly but deeply. The Concorde Council met in secret, their voices hushed as they reviewed fragmentary data. Every simulation they ran ended in failure. The invading fleet, known only as the Riftborn, used unpredictable patterns, sudden attacks, and shifting formations. Their ships didn't match any known design, and they seemed to jam standard targeting systems. No Concorde doctrine had answers. That's when one counselor, a soft-spoken archivist from the Tauran species, spoke a single line. "Perhaps it is time to ask the humans." The room went silent. It was not an easy decision. Many still saw humanity as untested, too wild, too new. But facts were facts. The ISS Forge had succeeded where others had failed. So the message was sent, and Eleanor Rourke, now promoted to commander, stood before the council just days later, calm but firm. She didn't ask for extra resources. She asked for freedom to choose her crew, her tactics, and her targets. With little choice, the Concorde agreed. A strike fleet of 17 ships, including scout frigates and defense cruisers, was placed under her temporary command. Some captains objected. They didn't trust a human to lead them. But orders were orders, and so they followed at first, reluctantly. From the start, Elena changed everything. Instead of keeping the fleet in formation, she broke it into fast-moving groups with mixed ship types. She placed signal jammers on the outside of asteroid fields, used old mining stations as decoy command centers, and even sent fake data bursts pretending to be lost convoys. When the Riftborn arrived swift, silent, and strange, they found themselves walking into traps. Elena didn't try to match their strength. She attacked their weaknesses. She forced them into narrow gaps, cut off their supply lines, and hit their scouts before they could map the region. Her crew hacked enemy signals, not to block them, but to send confusing echoes back, making the Riftborn see ships that weren't there and miss the ones that were. She deployed ships in the shadows of moons, using gravity to mask their movement. More than once, a Concord officer asked her why she was fighting this way, and Elena simply answered, because they don't expect it. In battle after battle, the Riftborn were caught off guard. For the first time, they pulled back. They weren't defeated, not fully, but they were slowed down in that delay. The Concord saw hope. The other captains, once doubtful, began to admire the Forge and its crew. The human tactics at first seen as reckless were now studied with interest. Concord tacticians, watching from high-orbit command centers, started recording every maneuver and creating new protocols based on Elena's methods. She had done more than just fight. She had changed the way the Concord thought about war. On board the Forge, her crew remained focused. They knew the Riftborn weren't gone. The enemy had simply returned to regroup. Elena believed the real fight was still ahead, and she didn't relax. She kept testing new tactics, running drills that pushed her crew to their limits, and studying every scrap of data from the enemy's movements. They noticed something disturbing. The Riftborn were learning too. Each new encounter showed changes in their behavior. They were adapting just like humans. That made the situation even more dangerous. It wasn't a war of ships anymore, it was a war of minds. As the Concord Council watched this silent battle unfold, many began to reconsider their old views. Humanity was no longer the outsider. In fact, they might be the Concord's best chance at survival. Elena was invited to speak before the full council, a rare honor. She didn't wear medals or bring fanfare. She stood simply, calmly, and gave them the truth. You have protected peace for centuries by making everything predictable, she said. But peace built on patterns will always be broken by chaos. And when that happens, you don't need perfection, you need people who know how to survive chaos and turn it into strategy. Her words struck deep. After the meeting, Concord Command quietly began rewriting their fleet protocols. A new doctrine was forming based not on control, but on adaptability. And at the center of it stood the humans, the Forge, and a future no longer shaped by tradition, but by creativity. The ISS Forge returned to Concord's space slower than when it had left, its once bright hull now scorched with plasma burns and streaks of carbon scoring. A silent record of battles fought and survived, though its systems were strained and parts of its armor barely held together. The ship was intact and, more importantly, victorious. The crew, though exhausted, stood tall with pride, knowing they had done what no one else could. They had pushed the Riftborn invaders back into the unknown, into the same dark reaches from which they had come. No one had expected it. No Concord fleet had dared hope for a turnaround, and yet, the Forge had not only held the line, but forced the enemy to retreat. Back at the central dockyards above Concord Prime, dignitaries, generals, and science officials stood on high platforms as the battered ship came to rest. Applause was muted at first, then grew. SLOW and stunned, like an audience unsure whether to cheer or salute. Captain Eleanor Rourke disembarked without ceremony, still in her flight uniform, with grease on her sleeves and a datapad in her hand. She had no interest in praise. What mattered to her was what came next. Within hours, she was invited to a private summit with the Concord High Council, who offered her a high-ranking position in the Fleet Development Bureau. She could have had any title, any lab, any office. They wanted her to teach, to lead from above, to oversee the future of fleet strategy. But she didn't even hesitate before refusing. Elena asked for something unexpected, something no one could understand at first. She asked for 5 more derelict ships, broken and forgotten vessels from the Concorde's scrapyards. Not new cruisers, not advanced fighters. The worst of the worst, the ones deemed unfit to fly. Along with them, she requested a training license to recruit and command her own crews, all human, handpicked from Earth's backwaters and colonies. She didn't want perfect soldiers. She wanted problem solvers, survivors, builders, people who had learned to work with little and make it go far. At first, the council didn't know whether to laugh or argue, but they had seen what the Forge could do, and in the silence that followed her request, realization slowly settled. Elena didn't want to build ships, she wanted to build a doctrine, a new way of thinking. A style of warfare not based on precision and elegance, but on adaptation, speed, and creative pressure. She wanted to build something that couldn't be predicted. Something living. Reluctantly, but with growing curiosity, the Concorde granted her request. In the months that followed, a quiet transformation took place in a hidden section of Luna's secondary dockyards. The 5 derelict ships arrived one by one, rusted, fractured, outdated. But where others saw junk, Elena and her engineers saw blueprints. They stripped the vessels down, restructured them from the inside out, replacing fragile Concorde systems with Earth-made tech. Tough and modular, engines were refitted with hybrid cores. Ice systems were rebuilt from scratch using human combat simulations and learning routines. Shield arrays were redesigned for flexibility, able to shift power instantly in the middle of battle. But the biggest change wasn't in the metal. It was in the people. Elena trained her new crews in ways no Concorde officer ever had. She pushed them into zero-light training, survival scenarios, simulated ambushes, and psychological warfare drills. She made them learn how to think during confusion, how to act without orders, and how to make fast choices with limited data. These weren't soldiers who waited for plans, they made them in real time. They were builders and breakers, taught to tear down and rebuild even as they flew. Word spread again, quieter this time, almost like a rumor. Alien tacticians began attending the test runs, observing with wide, cautious eyes. One ship, the ISS Ember, took out a full simulation fleet using a minefield made from hacked cargo drones. Another, the ISS Drift, faked a system crash to bait enemy AI into boarding, then pulsed an EMP and escaped while the enemy was blind. These were not traditional victories. They were messy, clever, and terrifyingly effective. Slowly, Concorde's military academies began to adjust their curriculum. New simulations included unpredictability tests. Fleet captains were encouraged to improvise. And always, in every meeting, one name kept returning: Earth, humanity, the Forge. The aliens who had once laughed when they gave the humans the weakest ship now watched with silent respect, because that joke had become something far greater. That gift had become a warning. Earth was no longer just a new voice in the Concorde. It had become a forge, in truth, a place where failure became fuel and weakness became strength. And from that forge came not just ships, but ideas, strategies, lessons. A new kind of warfare, one not built on centuries of tradition and polished doctrine, but on the sharp edge of necessity. Elena's doctrine spread like sparks through dry grass. Quietly, relentlessly, other Concorde species began requesting joint training. Some even offered their own derelict ships, asking to see what humans might do with them. And as the threat of the Riftborn loomed in the distance, never fully gone, there was a new confidence spreading among the stars. Because this time, the Concorde would not be meeting the enemy with outdated formations and rigid plans. They would meet them with something human, something alive. And in the heart of it all stood the once laughed-at ship, the ISS Forge, and the woman who had refused to accept what was given and instead reshaped it all.